available at that point in life. And that sounds very populist, right? Everybody, it's a human right to just have that freely available. Now, the true effect of that would not just be that. It would be to completely reduce any incentive that anyone would have to develop those things, and therefore reduce the cost that society has to spend on providing all of the new things, and reduce the growth of healthcare costs. Basically, the point is, free entry in that case can help get rid of the wasteful expenditures on developing all of these. Yeah, Tejas.
Something putting out then take art.
Yeah.
How is that a barrier? Anyway, or is it just like a talent perspective?
Well, I think it is. I think it's a barrier because anyone could get into the business of producing Andy Warhol, but Andy Warhol can keep them out of that just because he says, "I'm Andy Warhol, and this is a real Andy Warhol," right? So that's his trademark, right? So. Regardless of whether barriers to entry are good or whether they're bad, they're clearly sort of unnatural. They come from some sort of a social norm or a government intervention or something like that. And the traditional argument is that in the absence of these unnatural barriers to entry, basically entry will eliminate all profits. And this is probably like one of the most classical, deepest economic ideas. It shows up in Adam Smith. You learn it in all of your courses. And I think there's some cases where it's quite useful and in fact correct, like in the intellectual property context. So in Peru, I always use Peru as an example, you can basically buy an iPod that's not made by Apple. And it's exactly the same as an iPod, except that it doesn't link up very well with iTunes and whatever. But other than that, it's exactly the same as an iPod. But because there's basically like crap patent protection in Peru. So there's some Taiwanese company that makes like an iPod and sends it to Peru, and they sell it for $25 rather than $200, and that's what everybody uses, right? And so that really undermines Apple's ability to design any product for the Peruvian market, and therefore that actually really hurts Peru because there are very few products available in Peru because it's so easy to imitate their products. Now, but the number of cases where it's really possible to do something like this is much more limited. So, and the rest of the lecture I'm going to cover limits to this type of free entry. The basic problem is it often requires talent to produce a product. So it may be true that any idiot or any moderately intelligent Taiwanese person can go out and reverse engineer and come up with another iPod. But that's probably not true in other cases. So I don't think you can just completely freely go out and become Steve Jobs, right? You may be able to reverse engineer his little iPod, but you probably can't reverse engineer what it takes to be him, right? And you probably also, just by watching LeBron James, can't yourself become LeBron James, right? So because talent like Steve Jobs and LeBron James's is scarce, it commands a rent. It allows them to make some profits. It's a barrier to entry, but it's not like it comes out of any sort of a social norm or a government policy or private violence. It just comes out of the fact that different people have different amounts of talent. So free entry, in the usual way that economists use it, requires not just that the government not be messing around, but that everybody have the same amount of talent. And that's not very realistic. So a key factor in whether it's possible just to imitate and whether talent is important or not is how one defines an industry. So if one defines an industry very narrowly, just like touchscreen smartphones, well, it's pretty easy for anyone to create a touchscreen smartphone. I mean, it requires some technical knowledge, but not a lot. Most people who have some reasonable training in computer science can do that. But the thing is that Apple, as a company, is really not touchscreen smartphones. Apple is the company that's always doing the next thing and like redefining what the technology industry is about. So when the touchscreen smartphones got not so profitable, Apple brought in the tablet computer. And now everyone's saying, oh, well, the iPhone 4S, not so great. Well, probably Apple's going to bring out the next thing that's going to completely define the technology industry, right? So it's often easy to imitate narrowly defined things, but it may not be that easy to imitate Apple's ability to be the next technological engine. It's not. You can't really just freely enter the industry of being Steve Jobs, right? So Nokia is a perfect example of someone that wasn't like Apple, right? They were doing some very narrowly defined technical thing, like making these cheap little cell phones at the cheapest way anyone could do it. And it was pretty easy for other people to imitate them, and Nokia is now basically on the verge of bankruptcy. American car companies found out the same thing. Building a car, just a standard car, is something that a lot of people can do. And in fact, the Japanese could do it a lot better than they could do it. And so the American car companies have basically been on the verge of bankruptcy ever since or have repeatedly gone through bankruptcy since the 80s. And the legacy air carrier has found out the same thing. It was very easy for JetBlue and other people to come in and do what they did better. But if you think about broader industries, especially in high technology, these are often defined by the introduction of new products, rather than by just doing the same old thing better. So David King? Yeah. Can you give some examples of industries which are defined by the introduction of new products?
Well, I guess several Silicon Valley companies.
Yeah.
So companies in the business of producing new computer chips.
That's a perfect example.
IBM, other high-end technology sectors like superconductors, maybe.
Absolutely. So, there's this famous law called Moore's Law, which says that the speed of processor chips doubles every 18 months. So, being in the industry of producing chips is not in the industry of producing the chips that exist right now. It's about constantly jumping ahead of the other person in terms of what chips you're able to produce. So that whole industry is defined by getting ahead and not by just doing the old thing better. Google is defined by what's the latest Google service? I don't even know. I mean, every month there's 7 new things on that little thing at the top of Google that says all the things that they do, right? So that industry is defined by bringing out Google Earth, bringing out Google this, bringing out Google Life, etc. Right? Microsoft similarly is constantly doing new things. They're now in the cloud. They're now doing new services on their old process. They're not just making Microsoft Word a little bit cheaper. They're just defining what the next generation of software is going to be. And the truth is, it may be possible to imitate one particular Microsoft product or one particular Apple product, but it's very hard to imitate the process of generating new products that these companies have set up. The reason is that building an engine for innovation like this requires an inspirational leader, a very talented staff. It basically requires being Steve Jobs, not just doing one thing that Steve Jobs did. Okay, so even if we think about a narrow industry, though, it's true, prices will come down over time if there's an increase in demand. But this doesn't always happen by new people coming into the industry and competing down profits, or by a large number of firms being there. Sometimes it can happen by the few people who are at the top of the industry figuring out a way to reach even more people. This, even though it does lead to lower prices and a more elastic demand curve in the long term, it can often lead to higher profits for the people at the top and unemployment for everybody else, rather than to lower profits for the people at the top. So, Navtesh Singh? No Navtesh? Okay. Does anyone else have an example of a case like this where the adjustment happened? Yeah, what's your name again?
My name's Matt.
Matt.
I'm thinking of like sports, especially where there's like that pyramid scheme where the top people can earn a lot of money, or like even the best, 0.001% are professionals, and the rest are just aspiring. Things like actors and teachers and stuff.
Yeah, that's a great example. Another one is like the music industry. So like the music industry in the 20th century really took off in like the 50s and 60s with like a lot of popular music. And that was because of the baby boom. There was like a lot of young people to listen to the music. But the way that that happened was not that like there was many, many more musicians. In fact, there became many less musicians in the 1950s than there were before when the demand increased. Because there got to be all these ways that they could reach more and more people. The development of sort of modern pop culture really happened during that period. And that made a few people able to reach many, many more people over the radio, over television, in big concerts and so forth. Professional sports is another example that developed over the 20th century. When there was a lot of demand for sports, it was actually that the top people were able to reach more people, rather than there being many, many more teams or many, many more sports. Similarly, fast food revolution happened during the similar period. So what happened was not that there was like more and more burger stands. It was that McDonald's and Burger King colonized the whole world, right? This has happened in gourmet food as well, right? So celebrity chefs, like Rick Bayless in Chicago, have set up these big empires. And yes, there has been some entry of competitors, but they've also gotten bigger. So it's not clear that actually their profits have gone down because of competition, given the demand for gourmet foods. Actually, they've figured out a way to supply a larger market. And what happens often is the big restaurants just grow again until the point where they're no longer very good. Mass production of design during the 1950s is another example of this. Rather than the big designers facing, like Mies van der Rohe and Michael Graves, facing lots of competition, they figured out ways to mass produce their stuff and to bring it to Walmart and so forth. And you might think that this is actually what's going to happen in the future of medicine and education. It may not be that as the demand for education and the demand for medicine rise, that there's going to be a lot more teachers and a lot more doctors. It might actually be that people find a way through technology to let one teacher reach a lot of people. And that might actually reduce the number of educators and raise the profits of educators rather than the other way around. So this is called the superstar effect, that one individual can reach many, many people. And that markets may adjust by the superstars becoming even bigger superstars rather than by competition. So in the long term, profits may actually be higher for the people at the top rather than lower. And this means that the distribution of talent is really going to be crucial for a lot of things that we're going to think about in this course. Because this is going to determine the rents, it's going to determine the nature of the long-run adjustment. If the top people are much better than the people just below them, it's going to be much more attractive to allow everyone to access them rather than more people to enter the industry. And note that it's not the entire distribution of talent that matters. It's really only the people at the top. So the reason that it's only the people at the top that matter is that those are the people who are going to be going into the industry, right? People who are sort of mediocre will go do something else. People who are at the very top of the talent distribution will go into that industry. And so the real question is not, is everybody the same? But at the top, are the people relatively similar? Or even at the top, is the best person much better than the next best person? This property is called how big the tails of the distribution are. A distribution is said to be fat-tailed if the people at the top are much, much better than the next people, and so forth. This is sort of the case when the geniuses are just way above everyone else. So one way to sort of think about a fat-tailed distribution is, you've probably noticed that there's